Welcome to Wickerson Studios for Patreon. I'm going to show a demo of how to make this simple script, and we'll go over in full detail. It will be dry on Patreon, but I have about 15 minutes to get through it. Let's take the script and get rid of it and start from scratch. What you're going to want to do is definitely, I need to downsize something for a second, just my Grasshopper window, so it's here. You are going to want to put in an object, and I'm going to choose a simple surface object. It's not the way we're going to extend the, we're going to begin very simply with dealing with geometries, and that's just something to get us started. There's a cylinder that's brought in. What I want to do on the cylinder is basically right click, go into expression, and double x times 2, because I want my followers to be interested in the math that goes in behind all of this stuff. I want to basically build a length of that cylinder, but I want to actually have that be related to a range. So I'll be using ranges quite often. So I will grab a range, and with a range I will have to go into the maths and grab a domain, and I will set a domain for that range to begin, because that's really how I come at understanding geometries. I'm going to grab a very, very small 0.02 number slider and put it in so nothing disappears. I don't want a 0 radius or 0 length cylinder, and I want to keep it pretty unitized in the sense of only going up to 1 in size. Now if I was to put that range in to radius and length, I'd have a whole bunch of these things. But I want to, in the sense, multiply one of them, which is strange because I've divided 1 by 2, and I want to show you how math can bring it right back to how it was. Then I want to multiply, I want to square it. So I want it by the range, yes, I want to go into, or the length I want it to go in, but the range, the radius, I want to actually have it so it's squared. And that's a way to put a little bit of math into it. The other thing I want to do is make use of a pattern that I like to use quite a bit, is jitter. And you won't really notice what's happening here, but as I jitter the list data, I am going to first of all grab that list and bring it in and put that value into length. And then I'm going to take this value of list and put that into range. And now I have a, you don't see it, but they're out of order and then jumbled up, and they're doing some pretty cool mathematical things, which makes for a set of cylinders a little more exciting than it was. What I will then do, you can always with these, and I'll bring it in as I go. I'm just going to grab an integer value between 0 and 100. I'm going to plug in my jitters. And it complicates the scripts a little bit with some spaghetti, but it allows me to change what's happening within there. And you won't notice it now until I actually move things away from their center. So what I'm going to do there is exactly that. Grab a move tool and move that geometry in the motion of what it defaults is in a Z up 10 units. Well, I want it to move in Z direction. But once again, I want to be able to do that in either a range or a series. And this is an example of going to sets, sequence, not choosing range, but choosing series, and then setting the start, step, and count to that. The count I'm going to set at an integer, which will come back again and again. I'm going to use 34 as an integer value. The step I'm going to set between 0 and 1, so very small step, and I'm going to actually bring that down to about 0.5, or actually I can make that even less, make smaller steps so I keep them tight together. And you're seeing the geometries as I reference them as to what's being looked at in each one. So I have this set of cylinders, and then we have a jitter. And as I change that seed, you'll see what happens. That actually not quite having effect yet, but it will once I get my number count, and you're not really noticing it. The start's going to default to 0, 0, 0. And what I'm going to do is also, I'm not going to put that through a jitter as of yet, which is why it doesn't have an effect, but I think I'm okay with that as a set to start. One piece of data I'm going to need is an expression. So I'm going to jump into here and grab my expression tool. And the one thing I'm going to be doing with expressions, as you go in here, you can get rid of one variable. And when you type in the other one, you must type in just x, because that's what's being referenced. And the script I'm going to write in here is x minus 1. Now there's many ways of doing this, but I like having this sitting here. So what I do is I take a number count and move that. I'm going to be using this quite a bit. I'm going to use my number count and always be reducing it for dealing with ranges. So the first place I'm going to put it in is into here. And you're going to see it has major effects on counting and not doubling out the last one. Because here, range will have one more value if you don't minus 1 to it. Anytime you use a range, I'm going to be sliding that in there. So the cylinder's been put through a move. The cylinder after the move, and I could have done this earlier, I'm going to cap it because I was going to grab a volume, but I actually want it capped. From that set of capped objects, I'm going to go into, normally I would grab a volume, but it actually works with the area. I want to find a centroid within that. And in doing so, I have my BREP, I have my centroid. I am going to do more to this in a sense of taking that and putting it through a rotation. So let's jump into Euclidean 3D rotate. Rotate around that center. My BREP's been brought in. I am going to plug in my geometries so they can actually start to rotate around that center. The axis I'm going to change for interesting sakes, not XY. I'm going to do YZ as a plane. You'll see how that has an effect on what happened. It just rotated them all sideways. And what I'm going to do is not just jitter. I'm going to grab the same data that I did here, which I'll be bringing in a couple of times. I'm going to fall back, just 1 second. I'll leave my page and have a look at where I was. I have to bring in yet another range, domain, and jitter into this. So what I will do is on any angle, I will deal in pi. I will plug that in so it will rotate on pi. I will bring in a range. And when I bring in a range tool, I have to set the step count to what I need it set at. I will bring in a domain. And because I'm dealing in 2 pi, I will set my numbers from 0 to 2.00 as the domain end. And now I have the ability to actually rotate those in a full 2D rotation. I'm going to leave it pretty low. Actually, I don't want it around 1. I actually want it between 1 and 2 or between 0 and 1. That rotation's done. I've got some data that I can keep using. And what's nice is that was used there. I can take that rotation, and once again, I can move that. And I'm going to go back into another transformation of move, keeping an eye on the time. The motion this time, I'm going to move it out in the x-axis. And if I move it out in the x-axis, I want to be able to jitter, do a range, and do another one. So once again, I'm going to use a jitter. Don't need to plug it in quite yet. And another thing you can do you can do this as well, jitter, even though it gets a little scrambly. You can put a jitter in here and throw it in the angle, and now it jitters up those. But I'm going to put my values of jittering, but right now it needs a range. I'm going to slide in my range as a list. I'm going to set my range steps back to the series count, -1. And I'm going to put it into another domain, and I find it's quicker just to go in and grab a domain. I'm going to set my count between integers 2 and 10, and maybe move that up to 7, so I'm going to move it out pretty far. And there you go, I've exploded it out. Now without the jitter, you'll see it stays pretty organized, but the jitter's fine here. I've done another move, and I want to do another rotate. So let's jump back into transformations, grab a 3D rotate, slide it in here. The angles have been set, and I could grab an angle with a jitter, or I could just grab an angle. And I actually think without the jitter, because if I pull the jitter and it starts to do something too crazy, it doesn't follow its pattern. So I'm just going to leave off the jitter on this angle count. I'm going to grab my centroid again. I'm going to leave default to my XY axis. You can see we start to have this pretty cool pattern of things going up. And with or without the jitter, you can see what happens. This stays pretty controlled without the jitter. And I think that's probably better than throwing in the jitter, but I can always put it in after. I'm then going to grab a simple polar array. I'm going to set my count pretty low to start, so it don't get jumbled and lost. I'm going to pull in my geometry. I'm going to see what's been turned around. And now I've got a pretty cool script. And just for visualization purposes, I'm going to go in the list, dispatch, pull it out here, and grab 2 params as geometries, which can contain pretty much anything. Well, not anything, but certainly geometries. And what we have here is the ability to grab one and then the other. And you've got pretty good control over this. You can change the count if you want. I'm not going to. You can change the angle of the rotation as well and jitter that. There's many ways to come in here, but I want you to realize with this simple script how playful and fun it can be by just moving, rotating, moving, rotating, moving, and rotating using jitter, range, domain, and a number. That said, you'll just have to remember to take your series counts down by 1 if you want it to have an effect. And as soon as you start playing with any one of these levels of params, you'll see you have total control over what you're doing. And we've got a few in the middle that the number count doesn't quite look set right. So I'm going to come back in and make sure we get the 4 rotation, got everything plugged in, got our ranges playing into our steps. I am a little curious as to why I have this internal system. These ones up. Oh, because I haven't taken off everything I don't want to view. I'm viewing everything right now, so I'll take off everything and only remain these last 2. And there we go. I have a pretty nice visualization of one and the other, both of them, if I highlight them. So I just highlight the one and put them both on. Let's take a number count up a little bit just for fun. You can always turn your solver off by the middle mouse key, bring it up, turn your solver back on. Got a pretty wild pattern there. And we could always start to throw those jitters back in that I wasn't using. So I'm going to take that jitter value and throw it in there. You start to explode it out in different patterns. I'm also going to play with the pi rotation, which can be very interesting to not send it through 2 pi. You don't have to. It's very organized if you leave it at 0, 1, or 2. You can also right-click and set on editing snaps and say I want 0.25, I want 0.5, I want 1, I want 1.5. And that's a good way to just be able to snap this and have it snap off at certain things that you like the geometries on. Nice little demo, 11.5, 12 minutes. It'll be my first Patreon. It's not as smooth as I'd like it to go, but certainly gets you in here making the script and not trying to follow along from tutorial. The GitHub file is up. It's not written this way. And yes, in time I won't be providing the GitHub files, the GH files on GitHub for those on Patreon. But I'm doing this to start to try and entice people to want to dig in a little more and help me support myself in a sense of having time to make these scripts. I always put my scripts to a lovely color blue when I'm done, and I feel pretty happy with that. And if I would just have any luck, I wouldn't be wasting your time. But that's life. And thanks very much for watching, and I hope you become a member of Patreon and go deeper and talk one-on-one and play with these scripts with me online in kind of a conference situation.